I will start with a few kind of refreshing information on the Africa-EU partnership and the joint Africa-EU strategy, because it's not always very well known. I will then, of course, come to the summit that took place here in Brussels early April, which was the fourth summit between Africa and the European Union. I will then go a little bit in more details regarding what has been adopted by this summit, and in particular what we call a roadmap, which is a sort of action plan for the next few years. I will then say a few words on the assessment of my personal assessment of what the main challenges are for the future, and then also say a very few words on the new, recently created Pan-African program. So just to refresh your mind, so for those who are not as familiar as we are in my unit, of course, with the joint Africa-EU strategy, the very first summit between Africa and the European Union, so all heads of states of the African continent and heads of states of European Union member states, the African institutions and the European Union institutions, took place in 2000 in Cairo. Then we had a long, quiet period, if I may say so, until the second Africa-EU summit that took place in Lisbon in 2007. And this is really an important one, because this is where and when African and European heads of states adopted the joint Africa-EU strategy and formally created the Africa-EU partnership. So December 2007 is really the origin of all our work today at the continental level with regard to the Africa-EU cooperation and relationship. The third summit in Tripoli in 2010 basically confirmed the main strategic lines that were adopted in Lisbon. And then early April this year, the fourth summit, and I will of course get into more details regarding the outcome. Maybe important already maybe to underline that in Lisbon and Tripoli, in both cases, heads of state and government adopted a so-called action plan for 3 years period, so 2007, 2010, 2011, 2013, which were articulated around 8 thematic partnerships. And one of the main changes with the recent summit is that we have completely reviewed this architecture, if I may say so, of the partnership, and we will go for a new way of working in the various areas, even if, in fact, the sectors and areas of policy dialogue and cooperation remain basically in line and the same. First of all, some words about the context of this summit that took place early April. Since over the last 10 years or 15 years, both Africa, the EU and the world have of course changed fundamentally. On the African side, as you know, the African Union is celebrating 50 years of continental work with the African Union, which has succeeded to the Organization of African Union in 2002, the creation of the NEPAD, the new Partnership for African Development in 2001, is part of this new African Union governance architecture. Africa has changed also economically. Many African states are among those countries in the world which register the highest economic growth rates, and this for a sustained period. On average, the African continent is growing at a pace of more than 5% per year. over 10, 12 years, so quite remarkable. This being said, this is still, of course, to be assessed also in front of demographic growth, and most economists and econometric models show that Africa should, on average, grow at an annual rate of 7% in order to really be able to achieve so-called middle income status for most of the countries. So still growth needs to be higher, but nevertheless many economic progress was made over the last 10 years, with still insufficient impact in terms of improving living standards, reducing poverty, and so on and so forth, with also a lot of differences both between countries on the African continent and within countries, between different types of population groups in particular. So a lot of economic progress, but still uneven economic, social and human development positive impact. Another important fact that has changed a lot on the African continent is the increasing number of external partners. You all know about the numerous analyses and studies and events discussing the increasing presence of China on the African continent, but it's also about increasing cooperation between Africa and India, Brazil, Indonesia, Malaysia, other countries. So multiplication of the external partners of the African continent, which of course is in broad terms a very positive evolution, with also a number of challenges linked to that. Another important element is the increasing, I would say, assertive voice of Africa in international multilateral fora. This is both, for instance, reflected in the intensifying dialogue between the G8 and the African continent. The fact that Africa is represented at the G20, the fact that increasingly the voice of Africa in UN fora, for instance, is also increasingly being heard, even if formally positions are still coordinated or taken within the so-called G77 and China group at UNA. On the European side also, of course, the context is very different from what it was 14 years ago in 2000 in Cairo at the first Africa-EU summit. First of all, we are now with 28 member states, so it's quite, of course, a significant increase. But also we have the Lisbon Treaty, the creation of the External Action Service, which has, of course, changed a lot in the way we interact and cooperate and have political and policy dialogues with our partners, including in Africa. Also, of course, in Europe, the economic situation, economic, financial, social situation has also changed fundamentally over the past few years, in particular since the economic and financial crisis in 2007. And so our priorities, policy priorities, our focus both in internal policies, but also increasingly being reflected in the European Union external action, and the focus on the need to increase growth prospects in Europe, improve job opportunities, in particular for young people. I mean, these are concerns that are increasingly explicitly taken into account in our external action, including in our relations with developing countries. And of course, at the global level, also a lot of changes, and in particular with this new so-called, to be short, multipolar world, with increasing number of donors and partners for development, and a shift in the balance of powers. Now, these are all elements I think well known from the general context. Now, the fourth Africa-EU summit that took place in Brussels early April was, and this is the feedback we get not only from the European side, but also from our African partners, from the African side, either through our direct contact with the African Union representatives or at national level or through our delegations in countries. This feedback is, in general, very positive. Well, first of all, the fact that 78 countries were represented, and among them 61 countries at the level of heads of state and government, is, of course, objectively a sign that this partnership is alive, is a dynamic partnership that attracts a lot of very high-level political attention. In addition, of course, to the heads of states and government, the heads of the African Union and European Union institutions. On the African Union side, Mauritania currently holds the presidency of the African Union. The chairperson of the African Union Commission was present, of course. And on the EU side, President Van Rompuy and President Barroso. And this is something that we sometimes have to underline to our African partners, is that with the Lisbon Treaty, with the creation of this president of the permanent president of the European Council, having the president of the European Council in the room means you have the highest political level of the whole European Union. Even, if I may say so, if no single member states would show up, this would still be the European Union represented in the meeting. And of course, in terms of achievements of the summit, and I will come back on that, the feedback we get is also very positive in terms of substance, what heads of states and government were able to agree on in the political declaration, in the roadmap, also in a standalone declaration on migration and mobility, which is of course a very sensitive, complex and important issue, plus a number of other side documents, if I may say so. All these outcomes are positively assessed. Also, very importantly, the summit was accompanied by a number of so-called side events or accompanying events. A civil society forum that took place already in October last year, and that allowed European and African civil society organizations and representatives to meet and discuss on a number of important issues in our relationship. The Youth Leaders Summit, so with representatives from both Pan-African youth organizations and European youth organizations. The Parliamentary Summit, so the European Parliament meeting with the Pan-African Parliament representatives. And then the Business Forum. The Business Forum, and I will be a bit longer on this one, was also a very successful event with more than 1,000 participants from both Africa and Europe. Many high-level business people were there, representatives from business associations, representatives from chambers of commerce, and we have them in the room, the representative from the Africa-EU Chamber of Commerce as well, which was also a very active organization in the Business Forum. CEOs, really leaders of big companies, but not only of big companies. We also paid a lot of attention to ensure that small and medium-sized companies could attend. So it was a very balanced attendance, participation, and with, I think, for the first time, very concrete outcomes, very important, not only policy recommendations, but also concrete suggestions for concrete initiatives to be undertaken. And we intend, with our colleagues from the relevant services, of course, to ensure that there is a follow-up to this important meeting. Now, on the joint Africa-EU strategy itself, and going a little bit more into the substance of the partnership, the strategy, and the roadmap that was adopted for the next 3-4 years. First of all, we agreed that as I already mentioned quickly at the beginning, to review the institutional architecture of the Africa-EU partnership. What does it mean? Well, this means in a few key words, trying to simplify the architecture. As I said, the previous Africa-EU action plans were structured around so-called 8 thematic partnerships with a kind of one-size-fits-all institutional model, meaning systematically in each of these 8 thematic partnerships, what was called an IJEC, so a joint experts group with people from African countries, African institutions, European member states, European institutions. A structure that, based on the experience, proved to be not as efficient as expected, and sometimes also as duplicating the existing institutional structures, be it on the African side or on the European side. I will give you one example, which is our cooperation in the area of peace and security. In the area of peace and security, in 2007 in Lisbon, was created the so-called IJEC on peace and security. So a specific joint experts group to discuss peace and security issues between African and European representatives. Now, this is an area where both the African Union and the European Union, and especially in the current institutional context, have very well established structures. On the African side, the Peace and Security Council, and on the European side, the EU PSC, so-called PSC, Peace and Security Committee within the Council. So these are structures that exist on both sides, that function very well, that have decision-making power, and the African and European PSC meet on a regular basis, at least once per year, and more frequently can hold video conferences or have other types of contact based on needs for dialogue. And this is definitely the institutional forum where the European Union and the African institutions can deepen their dialogue on peace and security related matters. And at the same time, these are decision-making bodies. So this is an ideal forum for this cooperation to take place. So why creating an additional new one? We agree that, of course, we need also a dialogue to take place at experts group, but there also we have existing structures, so why adding a new layer created under this partnership? So this principle of using, where possible, where relevant, the existing structures on both sides, to simplify, to be pragmatic also, to continue with those working groups or thematic forum for dialogue that work well, to continue with them, but those where no concrete results could be achieved, where no specific dynamic has taken place, let's stop with these series of joint experts group, and let's, to the contrary, build on the more differentiated groups that exist. To give you an example, in the area of agriculture, which is an important, increasingly important area both of concrete cooperation between Africa and Europe, but also of policy dialogue. Last year, the college-to-college meeting, so the Commission, European Commission to African Commission meeting decided to create a contact group on agriculture. This contact group, which involves on our side, on the European side, our colleagues from DG Agriculture, our colleagues from DG DEFCO as well, of course, and on the African side, the department dealing with agricultural development within the African Union. This contact group is a very efficient structure to deepen the policy dialogue and to discuss concrete cooperation activities. So this group definitely will of course continue to function, and we will continue to support it. Other examples relate to infrastructure, for instance, where in the old institutional architecture, infrastructure was dealt with in 2 or 3 different thematic partnerships, with transport, for instance, in one thematic partnership, energy in another thematic partnership. So the need for better coordination between the main subsectors within the infrastructure cooperation area was decided. So we now have a reference group which ensures the coordination of our cooperation in transport, water, energy, and ICT, which are all subsectors in our cooperation on infrastructure. A second important decision at this summit in Brussels was to try to be more focused. For those of you who have had a look at the document of the Joint Africa-EU strategy and the previous action plans, these were very, very long documents. I would congratulate those who have gone from page 1 to page 150 or something like that. I didn't do it myself, I must confess. But I think there was a kind of lack of concentration, not so much in terms of the sectoral range of activities in our partnership, because by definition, this Africa-EU relationship is very broad in scope. We cannot apply the famous so-called principle of concentrating on 3 sectors maximum. Obviously, at the continental level, I mentioned agriculture, I mentioned infrastructure, governance, human rights, peace and security. So we are already above the rule of the 3 sectors per program or per cooperation relationship. So no, not in terms of the sectoral range of our cooperation, but try to focus applying a very simple principle, which is let's concentrate on the activities that have an added value at the continent-to-continent level. So continental or sometimes multi-country or trans-regional level. Because we already have other, and that will remain valid, framework for cooperation between Africa and Europe. First of all, we have the Cotonou Agreement, we have the European Neighbourhood Policy for cooperation with Northern Africa, we have the cooperation agreement with South Africa. So with the Pan-African relationship, with this Africa-EU relationship and the Joint Africa-EU strategy in particular, let's focus our action plan or roadmap on those activities which come in complement to all we are doing already at the national and at the regional, sub-regional, let's say, levels. And this has been very helpful in our discussions and has really helped us to be able to concentrate the roadmap on a more limited number of activities, based on the nature of these activities and not in terms of sectors. And of course, what is new also since the adoption of the European Union multi-annual financial framework for the period 2014-2020 is the creation of a new program, the Pan-African program, created under the Development Cooperation Instruments, and so being funded on the European Union budget, not on DDF, of an amount which is not extraordinary, but still significant, 845 million for the whole period. So this means basically something like 100 million per year. So I'm confident we will be able to do very relevant and important activities with this new program. So, on the roadmap, just a very few words on, I will not of course detail each and every activity, but this roadmap, so which is a kind of listing of priority activities for the period 2014-2017. Why 2017? Well, because the next summit is expected to take place in 2017 and may review, of course, the political and policy priorities. So this roadmap is structured around 5 main policy areas that you see on the screen, and that replace the famous 8 thematic partnerships that we had under the previous action plans. Peace and security, of course, remains a very important area for cooperation, and I mean, a lot of activities are taking place in this area. Basically, the support to the African peace and security architecture is, of course, a very important framework for our cooperation activities. In terms of instruments, the African Peace Facility is one of the most important ones, but not the only one. I mean, CSDP and CSFP tools are important as well, such as the European Union training missions or other types of instruments. Or in the area, the specific area of maritime security, for instance, the EU missions are also important tools in support of this cooperation. So all this is, of course, referred to very, very quickly in the roadmap, but definitely an important area that will remain important in our activities over the next few years. Democracy, good governance and human rights remains also one of the 5 priority areas, with the usual key sub-areas for cooperation, let's say, of course, promoting good governance, supporting the African governance architecture, so that means the coordination and functioning of the whole set of Pan-African institutions, be it the African Commission for Human and People's Rights, the African Court for Human and People's Rights, of course the African Union Commission, the Pan-African Parliament, and so on and so forth. Also providing support to the African Union in its mandates in terms of monitoring of elections is part of the priority activities that we have identified in this area. We had very good dialogue as well on our cooperation on human rights, on gender equality in particular, and related issues. The dialogue and at the summit as well, the issue of the fight against impunity was also raised and remains, of course, an important part of the discussion. The issue of LBTG that some of you are maybe following more closely was also discussed, even if not mentioned explicitly in the outcome documents, but was of course also part of the summit preparation and the summit dialogue. The third priority area for in our roadmap is human development. And there, in particular, I would like to repeat what I said, the fact that this roadmap is really focusing on our cooperation and activities that have an added value at the continental level, because some of you may be surprised to see that nothing is, or nearly nothing is said about primary education or about social protection, which of course are very important in our cooperation programs. And policy dialogue and so on and so forth. But the reason is, of course, that this cooperation is more appropriate at the national level than, or sometimes at the regional level, than at the Pan-African continental level. So that's the reason why. To the contrary, cooperation in, for example, in higher education is highly relevant at the Pan-African level. This means promoting, supporting the Pan-African University. This means also promoting and supporting all schemes that promote the mobility of students across Africa. It also means cooperation between European and African universities in these mobility schemes. Cooperation in research, science, technology and innovation is also highly relevant at the Pan-African level, and our colleagues from DG LTD are very actively involved in this relationship with the African Union. Migration, of course, a very important area, and there, as I said, the summit also adopted a specific standalone declaration that I invite you to read, which is very short, which is 3 pages, but identifies very clearly the key areas for our continuous and more in-depth dialogue, be it on fighting the trafficking of human beings, being about cooperating in fighting irregular migration, in improving the management of legal migration and of mobility in relation to labor market opportunities and needs, involving also the private sector where relevant. Improving also the so-called development migration nexus, which means working with diaspora, which also means working on the issue of remittances, and the African Union is currently establishing a new African Institute for Remittances, and we intend, for instance, to cooperate with that institute. So in the area of migration, a lot of activities are relevant at this continental Pan-African level. The fourth priority area is sustainable and inclusive development and growth, and the support to continental integration, which are of course relevant issues for both Europe and Africa. And there are a lot of activities that are referred to, in particular the focus on improving the investment climate, not only by providing support to the regulatory framework, but also, for example, in the area of improving opportunities for access to finance, and in particular for small and medium-sized enterprise. These were issues that were also discussed at the Business Forum, for example, so we also have the recommendations and the suggestions being provided directly by the people concerned, meaning the business itself. Other areas of cooperation, of course, all the trade agenda. You will find references both in the political declaration and in the roadmap, of course, to the multilateral trade agenda, the WTO, the Bali agreement, the implementation of the trade facilitation agreement, the support being provided by the European Union in political and policy terms and in concrete terms to the African continental integration agenda, in particular, for example, by promoting, supporting the harmonization of investment rules, or promoting exchange of experience and harmonizing standards in order to ensure the quality of goods and products, also support to certification schemes and so on and so forth. So there are many activities which are highly relevant at the continental level in this area of private investment and trade, cooperation on trade. You will find also references to the EPAs, of course, the Economic Partnership Agreements, even if the Africa-EU Summit is not the forum where EPAs are to be negotiated. EPAs, as you all know, are under in the framework of the Cotonou Agreement, so part of the EU-ACP relationship. Infrastructure, agriculture, I already mentioned them, so very important areas for cooperation. And those of you who are familiar with the European Union Agenda for Change, which is the new kind of political priorities for development policy over the next few years, and which have inspired our current programming cycle, know that, for example, agriculture and energy feature very high in our agenda for change and feature very high in many of our current programming documents, so at national, regional, or also continental level, with this complementary element, of course, in mind. And then the roadmap identifies a kind of fifth area for cooperation between Africa and Europe, and this is building alliances on global issues, cooperating on global issues. Of course, now in 2004, there are two main priorities on the international agenda, and these are the post-2015 discussions and so the negotiations on the successor to the Millennium Development Goals agenda, on the one hand, and the other one being the climate negotiations with the conference, next conference of the parties taking place in Paris by the end of next year, and where Europe and Africa have certainly a lot of common interests, but that does not mean, of course, that we agree on everything, but still you will find a lot of common language in the documents that were adopted at the summit. Also important to mention that at the margins of the summit, Commissioner Hedegaard organized a ministerial conference, so with ministers from African partner countries and from and representatives from the African Union to discuss climate change. And this seminar led to the adoption of a ministerial declaration on Africa and EU common grounds with regard to the very important global issue of climate change and climate negotiations. So the institutional architecture, as I mentioned, simplification, trying to make the structure more dynamic and efficient. At the political level, of course, we keep the principle of holding summits every 3 years. We added the principle of ad hoc ministerial meetings, sectoral ministerial meetings, based on needs, but also maybe at the margins of very important international events. Africa and Europe could decide to meet one day on the eve of important multilateral or UN meetings, for example, on whatever topic, be it on environment, on migration, or other issues. And then we agreed to keep at service level, at experts level, a so-called joint annual forum, which replaces what was previously called the joint task force. And the idea there is to invite not only the representatives of the African and European institutions, of the African and European member states, but also to open the forum to civil society representatives, to business representatives, to youth representatives, I mean all organizations being not only interested but also being active at the Pan-African level in the framework of this broad partnership. And then, as I said, the working groups at expert level based on pragmatic structures. Now, a very short word on the challenges ahead. Of course, the dialogue to sustain this dialogue at the continental level and in multilateral fora will be very important. For example, on the post-2015, we agreed to consult regularly, to hold regular consultations between the two groups, so Africa and the European Union, in New York during the negotiation process. Another important challenge will be to mobilize contributions, and here contributions in terms of participation, of policy contributions. I'm not talking specifically in terms of financial contributions, of course, but mobilizing all stakeholders, so including, of course, the member states, both on the African Union side and on the European Union side, based on their specific interests in various areas of the partnership. And another very important challenge, in particular for us in the European Commission, will be to ensure the complementarity and coordination between all our levels of cooperation and dialogue with Africa. And as I said, we have Cotonou, we have the European Neighbourhood Policy, we have the specific provisions for cooperation with South Africa. In terms of financial instruments, and I come to the Pan-African Programme, we have to ensure complementarity with the European Development Fund, both at the level of the national indicative programs, but also the regional indicative programs, and of the intra-ACP envelope. We need to also ensure complementarity and coordination with the European Union thematic programs, the Global Public Goods and Challenges, or the Civil Society and Local Authority program, for example, and so on and so forth. So a lot of coordination between the departments within DEFCO, but also with other colleagues, will be important, and is a challenge. Now also in terms of the challenges, and this is one of the features of this partnership which distinguishes from our more usual development-based relationship, is that from the beginning, so in Lisbon, in 2007, leaders very explicitly wanted to build a partnership going beyond development. In my own terms, I would rather use the term implementing policy coherence for development. What does it mean? Well, it means that this partnership is not only about EU providing support to the development of Africa. It is a partnership based on mutual interest. In practice, to give you a concrete example, I said that our colleagues from DG RTD Research are very active in this partnership. Why? Well, because there is an interest from European Research Centre to deepen their cooperation with African researchers. So it is mutual interest. And this mutual interest in itself provides us with a very important leverage in terms of mobilizing more resources, in particular human resources, to engage in the relationship with Africa, to engage in this very broad cooperation agenda. So, implementing policy coherence for development, meaning building synergies between European policies for Europeans' own interests and our development cooperation agenda. This is what we intend to do and what we are starting to do with the Pan-African Programme. And in practice, and Bernard is here in the room, he has had lots and lots of working sessions with all our colleagues, not only on the African Union side with various departments within the African Union, but also on the European Union side with our various sectoral departments. And I will stop here in order to still allow for some time for the questions and answers. All the information on the partnership can be found on the specific website, that of course on EuropeAid website, but there's a link there is a specific website on the Africa-EU partnership which we manage jointly with the information department from the African Union Commission, and you can find all the relevant document information and so on this website. And there is also, of course, on the website of the European Council a specific page with a reference to the summit. Thank you very much for your attention.
My name is Davensky, Haitian Embassy. I congratulate Ms. Moreau, but I have a basic question. It's good to reinforce the partnership between Europe and Africa, but what about the former partnership between Europe and ACP countries? You say complementarity. I agree, but if you take in the African continent, you have the regional economic communities in the African continent program, and in the SCP, you have also the same regional economic communities. So it means it's more than complementarity, because you cannot develop a program and a strategy towards Africa and have a different one towards ACP. And it's why, I would like to obtain some clarification. How will it be handled, And a second question is the question of the new financing. About the 845 million, is it part of the European Development Fund, or is it separate? Is it a new financing? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments and questions. I will start with your second question. I mean, this new Pan-African program is not funded under the European Development Fund. It's being funded under the Development Cooperation Instrument, which is an instrument on the European Union budget. So it comes in addition, in a way, to the EDF. Now, maybe to be a bit more exhaustive with regard to the financial support that the European Union can put in support of the Africa-EU Partnership and the Joint Africa-EU Strategy. Of course, this Pan-African program is a very important one, a very important new tool, in particular because for the first time we have now a program which is specifically dedicated to supporting this partnership, which we didn't have before. And in particular, it will allow us to promote activities and support activities that, in a way, cut across our traditional instrumental architecture, meaning that we will be able to support activities which will benefit to Northern African countries, the African countries benefiting from the EDF, and South Africa, which benefits from the development cooperation instruments. So it's a very important tool in that regard. But this being said, a lot of activities will still, which are relevant for the Joint Africa-EU Strategy, will still be supported through other programs. And this is why our coordination with all our colleagues from the different departments is very important. I mentioned the Global Public Goods and Challenges programs, for example, which will pay a lot of attention to cooperation and activities in the area of agriculture in support of the CADEP, for instance, the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program, and we will come as a complement to what will be supported through the Global Public Goods and Challenges. So the Pan-African program has to be seen as a specifically dedicated tool, but not the only one in support of the partnership. Now, to come to your first question, which is in a way the same kind of question, but on the institutional and political side of the relationship. Well, first of all, what is important to keep in mind is that in Lisbon, one of the driver of this Africa-EU partnership is the recognition of the ambition of African countries to cooperate more at the continental level and even to integrate economically in particular. So the European Union providing both political support to this undertaking and concrete cooperation and financial support is of course a major feature of the Africa-EU partnership. Now, I mean, in preparing for the summit, I have not experienced any problem of lack of consistency of what we are doing or discussing in the framework of the Cotonou Agreement, in the ACP-EU relationship, or in the framework of the European Neighbourhood Policy. Let's not forget that this dimension is of course very important, I mean, Northern African countries being part of the partnership. In terms of representation, for instance, I mean, basically, sometimes the same people are in the room. So by definition, coherence must be ensured, and everybody is well aware of these different types of cooperation. Now, maybe behind your question and comment, maybe there is also the concern about the forthcoming discussion on the post-2020, on what will happen after the expiration of the current Cotonou Agreement. But I think this is something for the future. But currently, I mean, of course, we need to do a lot of technical work to ensure complementarity, consistency, avoid duplications, building synergies, but there is no problem of political difference, I would say. So for the time being, it's not a problem. It's a challenge, but it's not a problem.
Thank you. I'm from Africa CO2, and we have a youth department, and they completely missed actually where the grants can be found to do youth exchanges between Africa and European youngsters. Is that in this framework that these funds are available? Because I saw you mention a couple of times a parallel youth summit, for example, and also in the document I find a reference on that, but our youngsters can't find where on earth they got the budgets for that, because they also have initiatives on this topic, on climate change, of course, in our organization, where they would like to set up youth exchange programs on this topic. Thank you.
It's a very, very relevant question. Well, indeed, depending on the status of the organizations, they may be eligible to the civil society and local authority program. So that's one part of the answer. But the other part of the answer is that we intend to create, under the new Pan-African program, but it does not exist yet, we intend to create, at least to consider the opportunity to create a specific envelope or a specific window to promote and support youth exchange activities. The Youth Leaders Summit that took place at the margins of the summit earlier here in Brussels led African and European youth organizations to refer to and to request a so-called youth facility. So this is something we intend to study, to analyze. How can we respond to this request in practice? Now, coming back to the Pan-African program, it does not exist, well, it exists on paper because the legal basis has been adopted, but has only been adopted last February as part of the Development Cooperation Instrument regulation, and we are currently in the process of doing the first multi-annual indicative programming process and starting working on the first annual action plans. And then we will identify progressively the specific activities to be done, and promoting, supporting youth exchanges may be considered, will be considered in that regard. So it does not exist yet, but it's in the pipeline.
My name is Anna Pentras and I work for EuropeAid, the European Peace Building Liaison Office. Thank you very much again for this interesting presentation. It's quite a good news to see that the architecture of the partnership has been simplified. Indeed, it was quite dysfunctional, the previous architecture. However, one of the core purpose of the CHAS from 2007 was to have a peace-centered, people-centered partnership, and civil society participation was ensured in the different complicated layers of the previous architecture. You mentioned that specifically for peace and security, the previous IGEX could be replaced by PSC to PSC dialogue. However, I don't see any room as of now for civil society to be engaged in this discussion. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on the space for civil society, not only in the discussions, but also in the implementation of activities for peace and security. And this leads me to a second point on the African Peace Facility, where civil society doesn't have a say or a role at the moment. And just to say, those points have already been raised in the civil society forum that happened in October. And all the points on civil society participation are also relevant to other areas than peace and security. Thank you.
No, definitely, you are very right to say that the people-centered dimension of the partnership was from the outset a very important one. Now, first of all, in general terms, the various working groups that I referred to can be open to civil society. I mean, depending on the issues being discussed, depending on the activities being proposed also by civil society or other actors. So that's a kind of general principle. A second element of the answer is, as I said, that the joint task force will be replaced by same kind of structure, which will be these joint annual fora, which will be open to civil society organization. So this will be an important opportunity to discuss whatever the area, because these will be really cross-cutting, horizontal in nature. So we can discuss all the 5 priority areas that are part of the roadmap in this joint annual forum, and they will be open. And a third element of the answer, more specifically in the area of peace and security. You're very right to say that with regard to APF-funded activities, these activities are basically being discussed between, on the European side, the Peace and Security Committee, on the African side, the African Peace and Security Council. Our activities always take place in the framework of UN Security Council resolutions and mandate. So these are very specific activities coming in support of inter-African interventions in a conflict on the African continent, and are being and based on the legal basis for the African Peace Facility. Our cooperation partner is definitely the African Union. Now, it does not mean that civil society organizations cannot be involved in security, peace and security activities. To the contrary. And in this area, as I said, beyond the PSC to PSC meetings, we acknowledge the need to also have experts level discussions that could be more open. But we already have, for example, we have the Joint Coordination Committee on the APF activities, and at the margins of this committee, we could very well broaden the agenda, broaden the attendance, the participation, and invite other stakeholders to join and to discuss the cooperation and concrete activities in this area. So this is what we would like to go for with our African partners, in order to avoid to have, Joint Coordination Committee meetings in June, and then 2 months later another specific meeting discussing the same issues with basically the same people but plus other people. So taking the opportunity of existing structures, meetings, and fora for dialogue to broaden the participation, I think this should be the way to go forward.
Bonjour, je suis Françoise du site d'information à Frontline et du mensuel italien d'Ita. Vous avez évoqué le rôle du secteur privé dans votre présentation. La semaine dernière, le commissaire Pivax a présenté une communication sur le rôle du secteur privé. Et hier, il y a eu un conseil des ministres des Affaires étrangères dédié au développement qui a rappelé, malgré les efforts faits dans l'aide au développement de l'Union européenne et des pays des États membres, il y a nécessité de trouver d'autres sources de financement. Parmi ces nouveaux instruments financiers, il y a le blending. En quelle mesure le blending va être utilisé dans les fonds que vous évoquez et dans le partenariat Afrique-UE, sachant qu'on pousse beaucoup sur les infrastructures, et une des craintes majeures, il y a la société civile qui n'est pas très favorable à cet instrument, et de deux, il y a la crainte que malgré la volonté de soutenir les petites et moyennes entreprises que vous avez évoquées en parlant du Business Forum, les petites et moyennes entreprises, en tout cas on va dire africaines, auront du mal à accéder à ce genre d'instruments. Est-ce que vous pouvez... voilà.
Je ne suis pas une spécialiste ni du secteur privé ni des infrastructures, mais je vais vous donner des éléments de réponse, en particulier par rapport au partenariat panafricain, bien sûr. Effectivement, travailler davantage avec le secteur privé figure parmi nos principes adoptés dans l'agenda pour le changement que j'ai mentionné précédemment, qui est notre nouvelle ligne politique pour la politique de développement de l'Union européenne, qui a été adoptée il y a 2 ans. Travailler avec le secteur privé, je pense que c'est très explicite dans la communication qui vient d'être adoptée, c'est d'abord travailler avec le secteur privé comme un partenaire pour le développement, et puis aussi, bien entendu, comme une source de financement pas additionnelle, mais une autre source de financement utile et nécessaire pour le développement. Vous avez mentionné les infrastructures. Typiquement, dans les infrastructures, c'est absolument nécessaire parce qu'on le sait, les infrastructures, les montants nécessaires, et en particulier sur le continent africain, qui est un continent qui a d'énormes besoins dans ce domaine, ne fût-ce qu'en raison de sa taille, bien entendu. Donc le financement des infrastructures qui sont nécessaires à la fois pour le développement économique, pour l'intégration régionale, pour la mobilité des gens, etc. Investir dans ces infrastructures, on a absolument besoin, évidemment, des financements du secteur privé. Et ça, c'est un secteur type dans lequel le mixage, blending, le mixage d'une part de dons au titre de l'aide au développement et de financement privé pourra être tout à fait pertinent et efficace. Mais cela ne se fera pas, cela ne se fait pas de manière complètement, sans condition. Il y a des critères bien précis, évidemment, pour travailler en ce sens. Vous mentionniez en particulier le problème pour les PME. Je pense que dans notre communication et notre politique de travail avec le secteur privé, une des actions qui a été proposée est spécifiquement, s'attache spécifiquement à la question des petites et moyennes entreprises et en particulier de leur accès au financement. Donc je ne pense pas que ce soit une problématique que nous allons négliger dans le cadre des actions que nous allons faire pour promouvoir le secteur privé et pour travailler avec le secteur privé comme un acteur du développement. Je pense que ce qui est important d'avoir en tête aussi, c'est que, et je pense que c'était très très clair au Business Forum aussi, nous ne regardons plus le secteur privé seulement sous l'angle comment faire pour aider à ce que l'environnement soit favorable au développement du secteur privé. Nous regardons aussi le secteur privé comme un partenaire pour le développement inclusif et durable. Donc un partenaire qui travaille avec, en tout cas, une partie de ces objectifs qui sont les mêmes que les nôtres, dans le cadre de la politique de développement, et en tout cas des critères et des principes qui sont les mêmes que les nôtres. Par exemple, on va travailler avec le secteur privé dans la mesure où ce seront des entreprises qui respecteront les normes sociales, environnementales ou fiscales, puisqu'on a de plus en plus de normes dans ce domaine-là aussi. Et maintenant, de manière très concrète sur la question du partenariat panafricain et avec le nouveau programme panafricain, nous comptons faire ces opérations où on mixe une petite partie de financement sous forme de dons pour avoir un effet de levier financier, un rapport de 1 à 10 en moyenne en faisant ces opérations de mixage uniquement pour le domaine des infrastructures, qui, comme je l'ai dit, vraiment par nature est un domaine où on a besoin absolument de financement beaucoup plus important en volume que ce que l'on peut faire uniquement avec l'aide au développement.
Thank you. We're also working together with the Africa C2 and the Network of Entrepreneurs. Going back to the business issue, I think we should go even beyond the fact that it's supporting small and medium enterprises in Africa for development, but it's also the way we, as a European private business company that operates in Africa, and I think specifically in conflict zone, where we have the issue of imported raw material and minerals, and also the behavior of EU business partner dealing there, and also developing, but also building the peace together. Because I think this is a part that is missing also in the peace building. It's not only the civil society inclusion, but also private sector and big multinational company dealing in those areas where instability is also big. And I think if they still can operate with the unsecure zone, they should operate by building security too.
Your comment is more a comment than a question, and I can only agree with you. And certainly, if you are working in this area, you are aware of the recent Commission initiative presented by Commissioner de Gucht with regard to conflict minerals in order to promote, to be short, responsible behavior by large European companies, in particular in these conflict-sensitive areas, and when it comes to the exploitation of minerals. Another element of reply to that, or additional comment, we discussed at length the issue of the natural resource exploitation in Africa, natural resource management for the benefit of African development, since this is a very important issue, which is part of the Africa's industrialization agenda. And it's also an important issue for European, you know that the European Union also has a policy, a strategy with regard to access to raw materials. I think we will need to deepen the dialogue on that. But in any case, what we have agreed to is that we will definitely deepen our cooperation to ensure that natural resources, minerals in particular, are being managed in a sustainable manner for the benefit of Africa's development. And for example, in the framework of our consultations for the activities to be supported through the Pan-African program, we've been in contact with the African Union Commission, also with the people working on the setting up of the African Minerals Development Center in Addis Ababa, and also with the African Development Bank. And there are a lot of activities and actions that can be undertaken in order to ensure that such management is responds to the principle of sound management, good governance principles, and in particular, as you said, in with regard to the conflict sensitive areas.
Can you give some advice to the small not-for-profits that come out of the African diaspora and that we have here in Brussels, Paris, and the other cities? Because what my members tell me is that they have very valuable small not-for-profits that they set up here, and they have really very good hands on the ground often, but often they are so small that the feedback that I get is that the larger NGOs, they take away all the funds and they don't collaborate, or they don't open up as much when they arrive in their countries of origin. Do you have some advice to give to us into that?
This is a question that should be raised with my colleagues dealing with the civil society and local authorities programs. But my reaction would be that from our side, I mean, even if, of course, we are in favor of promoting this kind of activities from small organizations, emerging organizations, and so on, but this is not a reason to forget about the principles, the basic principles which underlie all our financial support, which are transparency, openness, competition, and so on and so forth. So I understand the difficulty of very, very small initiators of projects to compete in calls for proposals, of course, with larger organizations. Maybe federating small projects may be one track. Maybe also working directly with the partners on the ground, because in partner countries, our delegations are managing part of the civil society organizations program and issuing and managing calls for proposals locally. And there they have more room in terms of being able to support smaller projects or smaller undertakings. So applying not here through the European organizations, but through the partner country or the partner in the country, be it in Africa or elsewhere, may be another track.